Have you ever started baking, checked your ingredients, and suddenly realized you were out of baking powder, but you still had baking soda in the pantry? And then you probably asked yourself, can I just swap one for the other? It sounds like a small change, but in baking, small changes can completely affect the final result. Welcome back to the Home Cook Bible, where we make home cooking and baking easier to understand, more practical, and a lot less intimidating. Today, we're talking about one of the most common baking questions out there. Can you substitute baking soda for baking powder? And the answer is yes, sometimes, but not in a straight, simple, one-to-one way. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real difference between baking soda and baking powder, when you can substitute them, when you absolutely should not, and how to avoid ruining the texture, taste, and rise of your baked goods. Baking soda and baking powder sound similar. Their names are almost interchangeable in casual conversation. Both are white powders, both are used to help baked goods rise, and both are found in the baking aisle. So it makes sense that people assume they do the same thing, but they do not work the same way. Baking soda is pure sodium bicarbonate. It needs an acid to activate it. That acid could come from ingredients like buttermilk, yogurt, sour cream, vinegar, lemon juice, brown sugar, or even natural cocoa powder. When baking soda meets acid and moisture, it creates carbon dioxide bubbles. Those bubbles help lift the batter or dough. Baking powder, on the other hand, is more complete on its own. It already contains baking soda plus an acid component and usually a starch to keep it stable. That means baking powder can create lift without needing much help from other ingredients. So even though both are leavening agents, they behave differently in a recipe. So, can you substitute baking soda for baking powder? Yes, but only if you also add acid. That is the part many people miss. If a recipe calls for baking powder and you use only baking soda without adjusting the rest of the recipe, your baked good may not rise properly. Even worse, it can leave behind a metallic, soapy, or bitter taste because the soda was not fully neutralized. That means baking soda is not a direct replacement for baking powder, unless you know how to balance it. A common rule is this: 1 teaspoon of baking powder equals about 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda plus an acid ingredient, but that acid has to make sense in the recipe. You cannot just throw in random acid without thinking about flavor, texture, and moisture. For example, if you add vinegar or lemon juice, you are also adding liquid and acidity, which may slightly change the batter. If you add yogurt or buttermilk, that changes both flavor and moisture level too. So, yes, substitution is possible, but it is a formula adjustment, not a simple swap. This substitution works best in recipes that already include acidic ingredients. For example, pancakes with buttermilk muffins. Made with yogurt, chocolate cake. Made with natural cocoa powder recipes with sour cream quick breads, with lemon juice or vinegar. In those cases, baking soda may actually make sense because the acid is already there to activate it. Let's say your muffin recipe calls for baking powder, but the batter also contains yogurt. In a situation like that, you may be able to replace some or all of the baking powder with baking soda. But carefully. Why carefully? Because baking soda is much stronger than baking powder. It takes less of it, and too much can quickly affect flavor and browning. This is why experienced bakers often use both in one recipe. Baking soda reacts with the acid, while baking powder provides additional lift. That combination helps create the right rise, color, and crumb. So if you see both in a recipe, it is not a mistake. It is usually there for a reason. Now, let's talk about when this substitution can go wrong. If a recipe has little to no acid, replacing baking powder with baking soda is risky. For example, in a plain vanilla cake, basic sugar cookies, or biscuits without acidic dairy. Baking soda may not have enough acid to react with. That means less lift and an unpleasant aftertaste. You might end up with flat baked goods, dense texture, uneven rise, odd color, bitter, or chemical flavor. And here's the frustrating part. Sometimes the item may still look okay from the outside, but the taste and crumb will feel off. That is why baking can feel so precise. Ingredients do not just add flavor, they also create structure and chemistry. So when a recipe depends on baking powder, it usually means the formula was designed for a balanced, more self-contained leavening system. Interestingly, it is usually easier to substitute baking powder for baking soda than the other way around. But even then, it is not perfect. If a recipe calls for 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, you may need around 1 teaspoon of baking powder to get similar leavening power. But because baking powder contains extra ingredients like starch, and because you are using more volume, it can slightly affect texture. Also, if the original recipe relied on baking soda to neutralize an acidic ingredient, swapping to baking powder may leave the final product a bit tangier than intended. So again, it is possible, but it is never just a perfect copy and paste substitute. Here is the easiest practical advice for home bakers. If the recipe calls for baking powder, try your best to use baking powder. If it calls for baking soda, make sure there is an acid in the recipe. And if you need to substitute, understand that you are adjusting chemistry, not just ingredients. A good question to ask is, what is activating the leavener in this recipe? If you cannot answer that, then it is safer not to improvise too much. Another helpful tip, check the freshness of your leavening agents. Sometimes people think the substitution failed, when the real problem is that their baking powder or baking soda is old. To test baking soda, mix a little with vinegar. It should fizz fast. To test baking powder, mix a little with warm water. It should bubble right away. If it does not react much, it may be too old to do its job properly. Here's a simple memory trick. Baking soda needs help. Baking powder is more ready on its own. That one line can save you from a lot of baking mistakes. Baking soda equals needs acid. Baking powder equals already includes the acid system. Once you remember that, substitutions become much easier to understand. So, can you substitute baking soda for baking powder? Yes, but only with the right acid, the right ratio, and the right recipe. It is not a direct one-to-one swap, and if you guess too casually, you can end up with flat, bitter, or strangely textured baked goods. The safest move is always to use the exact leavener the recipe calls for. But when you understand the chemistry behind it, you can make smarter baking decisions and save a recipe when needed. If you found this helpful, subscribe to the Home Cook Bible for more simple baking tips, kitchen answers, and practical guides that make cooking at home easier and more successful. And in the comments, tell me this. Have you ever swapped baking soda and baking powder in a recipe? And did it work? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.